Broncos country. Hope everyone has had a great, safe first week of August. My name is Keegan Hartman, one of the co-hosts of Broncos Brawl Podcast. I know what you're probably thinking right now. Where's Alex and Byron? Well, don't worry, because the show is still in existence and it's thriving very much so. But this week we wanted to incorporate another aspect, another idea we've been wanting to bring to you guys. And that is this week and for the remainder of 2020, hopefully, we will begin the Broncos Brawl Beat Writer Briefly series. This series will feature myself as the moderator, as well as the two gentlemen joining me, Broncos Brawl Beat Writers, veterans. First and foremost, you can find him and follow him on Twitter at ThatKidMid, as he has many great articles to his resume thus far, including his most recent covering the Ja'Wuan James situation. And you can find that on thebrawlnetwork.com. He is Andy Martinez. Andy, happy Thursday, man. How you been?
Yeah, man. I've been good, man. Thankfully, all's well over here. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Honestly, I'm just ecstatic to be here. I'm excited for the future of this series, and I'm ready to talk some Broncos football.
For sure, man. I mean, this is our first physical conversation, so this is really great to be able to
Right.
I don't get much screen time with the writers, obviously. Most of the time I'm talking to Alex and Byron, so to be able to talk to not only you but our next guest, it's awesome, guys. Great to have you, man. And finally, last but not least, he is not only a beat writer covering the Broncos Brawl, but he's also credited for running the social media accounts. You can also find him and follow him on Twitter as well at Noah Smith 735. He is Noah Smith. Noah, happy Thursday. How's your week been, man?
Hey, man, it's been going well. I'm staying safe. Super happy to be here. Like Andy said, I'm just super anxious for some Broncos football.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you as well, my friend. Glad all is well. Glad all is well with the both of you gentlemen, and glad you're staying safe during these trying times. But as you know, without further ado, we have a lot to cover. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So I think it is obvious that we kick off this little show with one of the more trending topics, and this not only in regards to the Broncos, but it's news that's pretty much consumed the entire media wave in terms of the NFL. And that news, the topic story being that on Monday, news broke that right tackle Ja'Wuan James notified the team that he was going to be opting out for the 2020 regular season in light of COVID-19. Now, obviously, this year has been a little different in light of COVID-19, as the NFL put in place a legislation, if you will. It would simply allow NFL players to opt out of the 2020 regular season if they felt it was necessary. Obviously, the NFL kind of showing their players that the players' safety comes first, and it's one of their major concerns heading into the 2020 season. So far, in and across the NFL, it has been reported that 53, I believe 54 as of today, have chose to opt out of the 2020 regular season. Leading that pack is the New England Patriots. They have a reported 8 players that have opted out for the 2020 season. As for Denver, they only have 2 players, and that being Ja'Wuan James, of course, being reported this week. And then last week, veteran defensive tackle, I should say, Mr. Kyle Peko, notified the team that he would opt out of the 2020 season. Now, these players weren't necessarily missing out on compensation for the 2020 season, as players are going to be receiving stipends anywhere from $150,000 to $350,000 based off of that player's risk or susceptibility. I'm assuming this is how CBS Sports had reported it, how the stipend process was going to be going, and that's how they're going to be basing off a player's income or a check, if you will. So, Andy, I'm going to start with you, man. First and foremost, you had a great article that you put out earlier this week, and you guys can go catch that on the brawlnetwork.com. Let's talk about Ja'Wuan James. And certainly it was in regards to Ja'Wuan James, talking about your article. You brought up the point that, Ja'Wuan James is signed to a 4-year, $52 million deal, and making him the highest paid offensive tackle in the NFL at the time, with the hopes to help bolster the offensive line, only to lose him to a plethora, I guess is the only way to put it, a plethora of injuries while with the Broncos. You flash forward, and now here we are and he's only played roughly 60 snaps. What does Denver do from here on out now that Ja'Wuan James is out? He's opting out. What does this do for not only the two's relationship, but also what does it do for the Broncos as a whole?
Yeah, well, it's no secret that James is off to a rocky start here in Denver. I think the growing frustration just comes from the simple fact that the money being put into James isn't really being translated to production on the field. You mentioned he's only taken about 60 snaps or so since signing with the team. It's a tough situation, but look, it's the NFL. Stuff happens, and as a team, you can't just sit there and dwell on it. It's just the next man up. So, as far as what Denver does to overcome that massive loss at the tackle position, I think you can definitely go out and get a veteran tackle to compete at the position. But like I talked about in my article this week, I think that job is ultimately Elijah Wilkinson's to lose. Last year he came in, he was kind of a lifesaver for the Broncos. He stepped in for James most of the season, many of the times without warning, because James was constantly being questionable on game day, and Wilkinson just came in and did his job. I think the Broncos are pretty confident in Mike Munchak's coaching ability. I think they're comfortable with another season with Wilkinson at the tackle position. And I think more of it comes just after seeing Locke's ability to escape the pocket towards the end of the season.
I think you bring up a good point there. And I was gonna say on Drew Lock, yeah, definitely the mobility is going to play to their benefit. All right, Noah, do you foresee the Broncos maintaining their relationship with James, given how much money they've lost since his signing?
I see them maintaining that relationship. According to some reports I've seen, so they're actually going to be pushing his current contract for the 2020 season back to 2021. So essentially, he'll have played last year on his original salary, and then they'll be playing this year on the stipend salary. Not playing this year on the stipend salary, and then next year, starting in 2021, 2022, and 2023, those will pick up those last 3 years of the original contract. So starting next year, it would be about $18.85 million to cut Ja'Wuan James when he's slated to make about $12.85 million. So that's a loss of about $6 million just to cut Ja'Wuan James, just to spite him for, not being around for a personal issue, for an injury. And as frustrating as it is for Broncos fans to say, this guy hasn't been there for the first 2 years. You have to look at it from a team perspective. You have to look at it from a salary perspective and say, cutting him for $6 million with losing $6 million really doesn't make sense. I think the biggest thing the Broncos could do is support Ja'Wuan James in this, make him really feel welcome with the team when he comes back. He has a new baby boy, as you stated earlier, Keegan. Let him spend that time. Make sure that kid is safe, make sure he's good to go for the 2021 season. And I think you see Ja'Wuan James as the starting right tackle in the 2021 season.
I think Drew Lock could have a serious effect on the offensive line as a whole. And I think that, yes, Andy, you brought up a good point with Elijah Wilkinson stepping up. He did good. He did what he had to do and played his part. But I honestly think honestly, the answer is just Drew Lock. That is the answer to that right now. I think that with how mobile he is, with his frame, his size, I think this is really a small bump in the road, and I'm reluctant to say this. I really think we're over analyzing this whole thing. Yes, losing Ja'Wuan James, don't skew the narrative here. Ja'Wuan James is a huge blow to the Broncos offense. However, when you have a guy as mobile as Drew Lock, because you have to keep in mind that Brandon Allen and Joe Flacco and Drew Lock are 3 different quarterbacks. You could pick out each one of them in a lineup. It's just they're so different in so many ways. And I feel like of the 3, the most athletic of those 3 is Drew Lock. So I really feel like the offensive line is a minor issue, especially given the fact that it's even with the loss to Ja'Wuan James, it is still improved. And I still think Mike Munchak and the boys can still get it done. Do just enough, and Drew Lock will take care of the rest. I think that is what I have learned from this entire thing. But yes, excellent perspective. So speaking of flexibility, you've got three different pieces that you brought in, and correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to fill in, guys. But as I'm thinking about it, you have guys like Lloyd Cushenberry, you drafted. Graham Glasgow, you signed last in the offseason to come in and fill that guard position. Cushenberry, obviously, filling that center position. And then you get a guy like Netane Muti late in the draft as well. A lot of flexibility for Mike Munchak to work with going into this season. How significant are those guys now, especially given that the versatility, the flexibility for the Broncos offensive line has kind of lost a little bit of its momentum now that Jawan James is out? I will start with you, Noah.
I think having a guy like Netane Muti, our draft pick from this past year, as a bench guy at this moment, I think that's really great for our depth, because I know this has been shot down all over Broncos Twitter, but Dalton Reitzer in his last season did play right tackle at a pretty high level for the Kansas State Wildcats. So in a pinch, this is not a permanent solution, but let's say Elijah Wilkinson goes down with an injury. In a pinch, you can move Dalton Reisner over to right tackle to play, and then you can bring in a guy like Netane Muti, who I personally feel super comfortable with playing 3/4 of a game as an absolute mauler in the run game and can hold up pretty well in pass protection. I personally would love to see Denver bring in a guy, maybe a vet, as some tackle insurance. How long has it been since Denver's had a guy play a full season at right tackle? I would love to see Denver bring in some sort of backup competition, but I think like Andy said, it's Wilkinson's job to lose at the right tackle spot.
And, going off of what Noah said, in a dire situation, having a coach like Mike Munchak gives the Broncos some flexibility to work with. I mean, you essentially have the ability to patch up in the offensive line as the season goes on. I mean, he's worked wonders for Denver. You take a look at someone like Jake Rogers, who came in the season finale against the Raiders. I mean, he played great. He played a hell of a game. I think he earned himself a grade of 81, according to PFF. So like Keegan said, I think having a loss like James is huge, obviously. But I'm not too worried for the Broncos in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So excellent points, guys. Great discussion here. And like we said, this Broncos Brawl Beat Writer briefly, this is kind of like an experiment for our first episode. So apologies if I'm a little bumpy, and I'm certain, speaking for these guys, apologies if you feel or hear a little bumpiness between us. It's a new thing. We're trying to get used to it, and it's going to get smoother with time. But I appreciate these guys taking the time today to be able to come together and be able to speak on a big story, really. Not only just within the Broncos, as we said, but, I mean, this was a story that broke headlines everywhere because Jawan James is such a big name and such a big key cog. So with that being said, one final request of you listeners at home, make sure that you follow these guys. Find them and follow them on Twitter. Guys, I went blank on the Twitter users. I read it off once. I want you guys going down the list here. We'll start with Andy and make our way over to Noah. Make sure you list off your Twitter and or Instagram and let them know.
Blah. Yeah, you guys can definitely follow me on Twitter at thatkidmtz. That's Twitter and Instagram. Noah?
I'd love it if you guys could go give me a follow. I post articles all the time on Twitter at Noah Smith 735.
Yeah, and make sure you go check out their articles as well. Always posting great content for the Broncos Brawl listeners, subscribers, followers, etc., etc. Once again, guys, thank you for tuning in to this new edition of Broncos Brawl Beat Writer Briefly. We will be back next week covering a new story and hopefully for the duration of 2020. With all that said, thanks for tuning in and have a great rest of your week.